Hello. So I'm Peter Jakowetz. I'm a managing security consultant at Quantum Security. I used to be an electrical engineer in my past life, and I've been kind of working as a consultant for the last 3 or 4 years, mostly in the governance, risk, and compliance space. So I spend my days writing risk assessments and assessing people's security, and then helping as well out with a little bit of architecture stuff. So today, I'll kind of cover a bit about why I'm here, what risks are, how I use them, how to write them, some benefits, and give you a few resources you can walk away with as well. So why am I here? So technical findings are great. Everyone loves getting a good pen test and finding some good juicy findings. And so we have all the findings. And sometimes that's pretty overwhelming. And no one's that keen to actually fix them all, or it's a bit hard to. And so that's kind of where the dirty word risk comes in. It's not something that all technical people are extremely happy about talking about and are good friends with, but it can be a really useful tool into actually getting things fixed. So yeah, as engineers, we like to fix everything immediately right now using this super technical solution, and not always are thinking about maybe some of the ramifications of that, or if there's actually a better way that's not always necessarily a technical solution. So this was just a little blurb I pulled down about what risk management is online. So information security risk management is the process of managing risks associated with the use of information technology. It involves identifying, addressing, and treating risks to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of an organization's assets. So what does that actually mean? So a risk is the intersection of assets, threats, and vulnerabilities. Assets are things we're trying to protect. So that could be our IP, it could be some technology, it could be people. A threat, which we've just spent the last half hour listening about, is what we're trying to protect against. Anything that can exploit a vulnerability, intentionally or accidentally. And so the third part of that is a vulnerability, which is a weakness or gap in our protection efforts. So vulnerabilities, the kind of things we have highlighted to us in technical testing, things that people tell us about, things that we see in our code or on our websites. And so yeah, a risk is where all those three things meet. So it's something bad that's going to affect something of ours that leads to something else. So why should you care about this? You've got your issue, let's just go fix it. We can use the risk to actually quantify those issues. Business owners understand risk as business owners understand money. If something's not actually going to cost them anything in the long run, why would I fix it in the first place? Not all technical issues are equal. Some things are really bad, some things don't seem so bad. When you actually dig into it, some of those low severity bugs might actually be quite a high risk issue. Sometimes a high risk or a high severity bug might not actually mean that much to you. It might actually be pretty low risk to your organization and your situation. So yeah, risk can help you contextualize and communicate what is and isn't important to you. Thought it was probably worth just kind of saying a bit about the difference between threat modeling and risk assessments, seeing as though my colleague just had a chat about that. So threat modeling is more having a look about all the things that can go wrong. And that's particularly useful in the design stage of a solution. We can pick out all the things that might happen hypothetically. A risk assessment can be really useful then further on in that stage. So once we've started building and then also throughout the life cycle, because we can really see what those threats actually mean to our organization. So there's a bit of a scenario that we'll come back to just throughout this. We've got a medium-sized e-commerce website. We've had a pen test done lately, and under a bunch of those things, we had a cross-site scripting vulnerability, which we just heard about at the start of today. And we've added it to a register somewhere, but no one's really that keen to fix it. There's no time, no money. This is a well-established website. We don't actually want to do any code pushes to it. We just kind of want to leave it as is. So what's potentially the risk associated with that? We've got a malicious person runs arbitrary code in a user's browser due to a cross-site scripting vulnerability in the comments submission field on the e-commerce page. This leads to information disclosure, modification, and may lead to loss of private information. So there we've got the vulnerability as the cross-site scripting, the asset is our website, and we've got some effects there as well. So what other things might we want here to be able to help communicate this effectively and get someone to actually go and pay some money to fix this? So we've got a risk statement there. What's actually driving this? What might it cause? What controls can we put in place? And how do we quantify this? How do we make it actually a thing someone can go and put and compare to other issues to go, yeah, I want to fix this one and I'm not going to go and fix this one at the moment because we've got limited time and resources. So some of the drivers to this, there's the obvious issue of there is a cross-site vulnerability. Actually, there's no regular testing that happens on that website. We don't have a WAF that sits in front of it, so Web Application Firewall. We have poor input validation. It's actually a pretty popular e-commerce website. It transacts a large amount of the company revenue because it's actually the main website for the company. However, there's a lot of legacy code there, and we don't want to push changes to it because if it breaks and we get an outage, that would actually mean quite a lot to the organization. And then if that risk was realized, what might it lead to? You might lose some personal information. You might lose confidence by users. Loss of revenue due to reduced confidence, and no one likes to lose money. And we might get some reputational damages. And then we just got to have a bit of a think about whether that would affect the confidentiality, the integrity, or the availability of that data on the website. And then what can we actually do about that? So we've got a few different types of controls that we can put in place. We've got deterrent, so that's your make sure you're being careful screens on websites. We've got some preventative controls, things like user access management and firewall rules. Detective controls, things like IDS monitoring and logging, or corrective controls, so backups and DR plans and the like. In our case, we could just go and throw a web application firewall in front of this. That would go and stop the cross-site scripting attack. It would be reasonably low effort. It might cost us a bit of money and a bit of time to configure. We could update the content security policy, as talked about this morning. We could update the code to kind of conduct proper input validation. I guess more holistically, we could make sure that we're actually doing testing of the web application for security vulnerabilities through its life cycle. So these things aren't coming up in a penetration test we're paying for, but they're actually just coming up during the development, so we never release code that is vulnerable. We could get some regular pen testing or some annual pen testing. We could have someone go and review the code, whether that's someone internal or external to the organization. It's a cross-site scripting vulnerability, but actually if you go and do some developer training early on, then that vulnerability might not exist. So you could look at doing that. You could put in place some logging and alerting so that if it does get exploited, you're more likely going to see. And putting in proper change control as well, so that before people push vulnerable code to the website, it's more likely that someone's going to peer review that code and go, that actually looks a bit suspect. Have you done any security testing on it? There's a couple of resources that are quite good for identifying some controls if you're having a bit of difficulty. CertNZ has their critical controls, so multi-factor patching, disabling services and the like. And there's also the ASD Top 35 cyber mitigation strategies. And that's got a really good list of controls that I guess are the most commonly deficient. So that can be a really useful resource to have a look at, just if you're struggling a bit to figure out what the best thing to do would be. So then once you've come up with a long list, and so that list doesn't have to be actually what you're going to do, it can just be giving yourself an idea of the types of things you can do. The more you put down there, the easier it is to go, that's a terrible idea later on, and actually we could just do a few of these things. So you just got to have a bit of a think. What would make the biggest change? What's the outcome that you want to do? Do you want to be stopping this stuff happening in the future? Do you want a really quick fix now? Are you willing to spend a bit more money? Or are you wanting to go and spend a bit more time and you can actually tolerate a bit of an outage while you get something fixed? If you go and add a bunch of details to those controls about what you'd actually look at doing, rather than it just being a two-word description going, implement a WAF, actually going, these are the types of things that I would need to enable in the WAF, and this is the type of alerting that I want to do. Can you roll a bunch of those things together into a single action? Especially around things like, you might want to do some developer training and then go and, so maybe some developer secure code training to allow your developers to then go and have a look at each other's code, do peer reviews, and that's part of your change control process. And those things matched together is going to reduce the likelihood of this actually happening again in the future. And if you go and put in one of these controls, can you actually then not go and negate a number of the other ones? Would one control actually go and reduce the likelihood of the impact of the risk enough that the others wouldn't matter? Which comes into, it's really useful to go and score things. So this is what makes it actually quantitative. This makes it something that a manager can actually look at and go, this is high because of this reason, this is low because of this reason. I've got the chance of losing this much money if I do this, I've got the chance of losing this much reputation if I do this. So we've got likelihood or probability, the chance of something happening, and we've got impacts and consequences, the outcome of what those events could be. And we look at that for what it currently is with this, with the vulnerability that we've found in place. And then we look at it, what about if we go and put some controls in place, what do we think we could bring it down to then? There is some guidance available on government website from the GCDO about privacy and risk assessments. And so that's got a bunch of help about this, including these. So this is an example of a likelihood table. And this will be completely different depending on who or what your organization is. If you don't have that much traffic coming to your website, the likelihood of someone exploiting an issue on it might be completely skewed comparative to if your stuff and you've got like millions of hits per day. So this is something that you can kind of size up or down as needed depending on, I guess, your own context. And as well, this can be completely used, I guess, for not just security risk, but really business risk as well. You can kind of see this. This is pretty horrible, and this comes off that same place. But the key thing to see here is that impacts are also completely configurable by your organization, and it really needs to be tailored to you. If you're a small e-commerce site, if you lose $10,000, that might be really severe to you. That might put you out of business. If you're a bank, you might be able to lose $100,000, $1 million, and actually that is you're pretty indifferent to that because the volume of money that you're transacting is just completely different. Similarly, reputation. You might just be in a business where you don't actually care what the reputation of your company is because you're there for a purely functional reason and people have to use your service. Similarly, you could be in an organization where reputation is really, really important to you. And so that's always going to go and skew your risks up if there's a reputational impact to something happening. Some other things to think about is health and safety as well. If it could cause injury or loss of life by something happening. So especially where maybe you've got an application that, like a notification application or something for duress. If something went wrong in that, and that could cause a loss of life, that would be really severe, and so your impact's always quite high for that. Comparatively, if it's a news app, the chances of you losing life through that is pretty minimal. And service delivery is another thing. Does it make life difficult for other people in your business if something goes wrong with that website? Do you now have to go and stand up a call center of 100 people because your website's down? And then you can go and put it on a pretty table and give yourself some scores. And this quantifies that risk to you. So again, this is pulled from the same resource, and this is completely configurable up to you and what your risk appetite is. It'd be common, I guess, for someone to go and kind of say that yellow and green is within our risk appetite and orange and red is above. But that's completely dependent on your organization. Are you risk adverse? Are you not? And that's something that really, I guess, senior management can talk to and decide. And that's why this becomes quite powerful, is because they're the ones deciding these scales. They're the ones that are kind of going, yeah, this is where our risk appetite sits. So then when you show them something and you go, hey, this sits well above your risk appetite, what do you want to do? It makes it a lot easier to be able to go, yeah, we really need to do something, or no, I guess we're comfortable with that. We'll put some other stuff in place. So some things to think about there. This really needs to be specific to your business. Kind of what I was talking about there was like you might only deal with thousands of dollars, not tens of thousands or millions. You might have a much more of a focus on people's safety. Reputation might be really important to you. And similarly, being available might be really important. A denial of service attack or vulnerability in your application. So again, if you're stuff, that's really important. Like you want to be available 24/7 because you want all your ad revenue that you can possibly get. If you're an application that delivers reports to people that they get once a month or once a year, hey, if you've got a DOS in there, who actually really cares? People can come back tomorrow and get it. That might not be so big of an impact to you. You might just say, actually, that's fine, we'll leave that there. We don't care about developing that out. Cool. And so then once you kind of have a bit of a look at that, you can come up with some recommendations. From that risk statement and the fact that you've quantified it now, you've come up with some cool controls, some things that you could do. What would you actually recommend to do? So you might want to look at doing some code review and make sure that everyone's well aware of input validation and implement that. Code should then be peer reviewed and put through static analysis tools before testing in production. You might also recommend doing logging and alerting to be able to trigger when types of attacks occur and ensure that developer training is conducted so that people are aware of secure coding techniques. You might just go, actually, let's just go and implement a WAF. That's easier. We've got a spare bit of money. Let's just do that. It requires a whole lot less effort on our part, and we can just keep our developers just doing what they do, smashing out some code, and try and improve some things in the future, but actually that will go and reduce our risk enough to make it appropriate. Or you can just do nothing. We don't care about this enough. This doesn't actually go and affect our business enough. There's not enough financial impact, or there's not enough impact on health and safety, or availability, or reputation that we actually care. We're willing for someone to maybe exploit that. No one's exploited it yet that we know of. We haven't been embarrassed enough by this yet. We might wait till it's realized before we actually go and do something. Not saying that's always the right thing to do, but it's a choice, and that's the choice of your boss to do. But by contextualizing things in the way of risk rather than just going to them and telling them a big long story about the technical issues, you're more likely that they're going to buy in, they actually understand what can come out of it. And that is exactly what I said. Cool, so far we've had a bit of a chat about what the vulnerability was, the associated risk, some causes, what it might lead to, how bad it is, and what we can do to fix it. So another example. You're working for a company and you've just gone and acquired another small company and they had a website with them. There's a privilege escalation bug in there and it can allow you to go and get global admin. It's not super easy to know because you actually have to know what the administrator commands were to be able to go and replay that and make it happen, but hey, it's possible. But if someone does exploit that, then it's quite a major impact. Has the ability to take over other users' accounts, but it hasn't actually been realized yet as far as you're aware, so it's not yet an issue, it's a risk. And so what, as an engineer, you might run into the room and go, hi CEO, we've got this really important thing that's happened. We're not validating requests correctly on this website that we've just gone and bought. There's some validation, blah, 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 blah. You go and talk in super technical terms for 10 minutes, eating his ear off. And it's fundamentally broken. We need to just burn it to the ground and rebuild it. And he's just like, huh? Why is it a bad thing? Do we actually need to take it down? What's the implications of doing that or not doing it? Has anyone actually done anything? Has anyone actually ever exploited this? Do you know that? What else can we do? Are there other options? If we go and burn it down to the ground and rebuild it from scratch, is this actually going to fix it? Or are we actually just going to find later on, once you get that tested, that you've got the exact same issue there, just in a different place? So that's where we can go and come up with a bit of a risk statement. So due to bad coding practices and legacy code, it's possible for a malicious person with a low privileged account to escalate privilege to an admin account on the website. This could allow disclosure, modification or loss, or system outages. So that as a single statement, you can go and talk to a manager and they'll go, okay, yeah, cool, I kind of get that. There's something wrong and it could lead to this stuff. You can then kind of talk about the likelihood and impact. So it's possible, although they'd have to have some existing knowledge, but the impact is critical as they could access all data, delete other user accounts and cause outages. Cool, I've now quantified that to him. He's now got a really good idea of what this could actually lead to. And so I'm just kind of using that same example of what you could do. So you could go and throw a WAF in place in the meantime to sort this out, which we can do, and it's going to take 2 days to do and cost about this much money. Similarly, we can just go and remove the admin functionality, which will make users' lives a little bit more difficult, but it will reduce the attack surface, and we can do that in 1 day. Or we can pull down the entire site and redevelop. That's going to take 6 months and cost you a whole lot of cash. And so by speaking out those type of recommendations and talking to your bosses in that kind of terminology, you've now made it really easy for them to understand. They've now got some really concise, things will cost me about this much, it will require about this much effort, it will cause this much impact to me whether I do these things or not. This is what the issue actually is versus just a whole bunch of technical jargon that they may not understand. Because there's always that fact that even though your manager may have been really technical back in their day, they also may not touch never actually get to touch a console anymore. They may have kind of forgotten what some of these vulnerabilities actually mean and why it's actually important. So what this does, it highlights some alternatives to the obvious. If you just go and jump at the first thing that jumps in your head, while it might seem obvious to you, you're often the person that's right down in the weeds, and it's not always the most pragmatic solution, I guess, to a situation. It highlights, are there better ways that you can do something? Are there simpler ways that I can do something? Actually, if I go and fix something here, and we're tracking this all nicely as well, and you go and present this risk up, the manager can then actually just go, oh, actually, we've had some similar issues somewhere else. If we go and do this one solution, does that fix all these things? Great. I've now got enough motivation to go and do this. If you just come up to them with the issue and say, we want to fix this right now, we want some money and some development time, you fix that one issue or that one vulnerability, and actually, hey, you haven't been able to go and kind of fix any holistic issues in the organization. And that especially kind of comes in around things like developer training. Like that might be if you've got a whole bunch of vulnerabilities coming up all around your environment, just going and implementing that's actually a whole lot more effective than just going and doing the point solution and then another issue coming up next week. Can this save me money? And is that high in a pen test report actually a high? Using this risk process kind of helps normalize issues to your own context. So often pen testers and even engineers internal to your organization won't always necessarily think about, so like a stored cross-site is a high severity issue. Is it actually a high to your organization? Have you thought about how many users are actually using this application? Maybe you've only got 2 people with access to the admin page who both work internal to you who have access to that field that's vulnerable to stored cross-site. In that case, is that actually that big of a deal? Versus it's a public website with thousands of users, yeah, that high might actually turn into a critical then. So in summary, risk frameworks can aid you to getting solutions to the issues that annoy you the most. A well-documented risk can highlight the issues as well as what it affects and leads to. Risk can be a good way to normalize issues from external reports and tools, and ensure you understand what's being put in front of you. So I guess the example there is if you've got a bug bounty happening, you've got a whole bunch of people passing vulnerabilities through to you. Are they actually important to you? Does it actually mean anything to you? Putting all your bug bounty vulnerabilities putting them through like a risk process might actually go and be really valuable to you of, hey, what are the ones we're going to pay out a lot for, what are the ones we actually want to prioritize in fixing. And it makes it easy, digestible for management, and you get some money for things that you want. So what I'm not saying to do is paperwork for paperwork's sake. Risk assessments don't need to be hundreds of pages long. It could be a spreadsheet, it could be a Jira ticket that you go through. You can automate this. It's just forcing yourself to go through that process. You don't need to take a whole bunch of time to do this. You should be able to go and knock through, I guess, putting your vulnerabilities in a risk framework within 10, 15 minutes, especially if you're the one that's aware of your situation. This isn't a thing just to go and throw to security to do. Anyone from developers, security teams, managers can do this. But as people inside your own organization, you know what's important. And so you're the ones that can help score this stuff and make it actually valuable to yourselves. And like, it's not worth just going and spending all your money getting someone external to do it who's got zero context, because then actually you're not doing the important thing. If you're getting people to help you, then you need to make sure they actually understand what is important to you. There's a few resources here. So from the GCDO website, there's a bit of stuff about risk assessments, helping you through that process, the ASD, mitigation strategies. There was a talk at KiwiCon last year from someone from Slack who had a really interesting process for risk assessments for projects that were happening to try and essentially a basic questionnaire people could fill out, tick some boxes, and then it went and fired up some Jira tickets if something was considered high risk to ensure that someone had a bit of a look into it, and cert top 10. So yeah, there's my email address and Twitter and stuff. Just have a chat to me afterwards if there's any questions. But yeah, thank you very much.